Hey guys, and welcome to another edition of the Kevin Moore Show. Now on today's show, I'm about to be joined by my guest, Travis Walton. Now, for those who don't know the Travis Walton story, on November 5th, 1975, a group of loggers in the mountains of northeast Arizona observed a strange, unusually bright light in the sky. Now, one of those men was Travis Walton, who recklessly left the safety of his truck to take a closer look. Now, what happened next sent his companions fleeing in fear. When Travis failed to reappear, the men were suspected of his murder. For 5 days, authorities mounted a massive manhunt in search of Walton or his body. Walton finally reappeared, disoriented and initially unable to tell the story of his encounter. His book, Fire in the Sky, provides an account of his experience and is now a major motion picture. So in this interview, I also get to interview at the beginning his friend Richard, who tells the story of being there when the Fire in the Sky event was breaking. And then I go straight into interviewing Travis and looking at the spiritual side of his UFO abduction. So enjoy my interview with Travis. Richard Gonsalves, thank you for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
So Richard, obviously, I'm traveling the USA right now. I'm getting to meet some amazing people, and I've come across some of the work that you do as well. So just for the audience, just give us a slight background on yourself to begin with.
I'm not sure what all you're interested in. I've lived in Snowflake my entire life. We've had other businesses. I'm retired now, and now I'm able to do some of the things that I've enjoyed all my life, such as the petroglyphs, archaeology. I've got a good friend, Travis Walton, which most people have heard of, UFOs. Clifford Mahooty is a good friend of mine. I'm interested in the archaeology, the things that Clifford has to talk about. And I've got a good friend that wrote a book on Asiatic echoes about Chinese writing in the petroglyphs, and I've been able to go out with him and find quite a few petroglyphs that actually are Chinese writings.
So I think what we'll do to begin with, we'll cut this in. Okay. So first, we're going to go back to what you've just spoken about there. But first of all, for the Travis interview, I'm going to cut this into the beginning part. So. Obviously, you've known Travis Walton for, since, would you say, high school?
He was a junior in high school.
Yeah.
And I'd graduated.
So you knew him, obviously, way before the incident that took place.
Yes.
And what kind of person was Travis, would you say, before he had his experience?
He was just basically a normal kid. He was 17, I think, when I met him. He was a high school kid, and nothing out of the ordinary. His mother was raising the family by herself, and so he'd spent a lot of time over at my house at that time.
So Travis wasn't one to make up stories or, to sort of, not tell the truth in a sense?
Right. He was very honest and normal. I don't know if you want me to talk about some of his family. He had some older brothers that were real hell-raising older brothers, and that was one of the problems that he had when he got picked up, is his brother's reputation hurt his story. They were out partying, getting in trouble with the law all the time, tearing up and down the streets, loud motorcycles and cars, and they were getting in trouble all the time. Travis was just a normal kid. He didn't follow in their footsteps at all. But when he got picked up, the police knew the family, and he was branded as the hellier or whatever.
Well, that makes a lot of sense now, right? Okay. So, do you remember the year that the event happened for Travis Walton?
1974, I believe.
1974. So, if you can go back there, I mean, when did you first become aware that Travis had gone missing?
Mike Rogers called me at midnight and asked if I got a call from Travis because he was looking for him. But he wouldn't tell me why. He just said, yeah, Travis we can't find him. I was just thinking he might have called you. And it wasn't until the next day that I went over and actually talked to Mike and found out what the story really was.
When you heard the story from the friends of Travis Walton to begin with, because of course Travis was missing, I mean, what did you think? Did you believe it, or?
I really can't say. Well, you know, it was a fantastic story. It was my friends telling me, and so I felt they were truthful, but it was a fantastic story it was a little hard to believe. But I don't know, I didn't disbelieve them and I didn't believe them. It was just I just had to listen to what they had to say.
And were you pulled in by the cops as well for an interview? Or?
No, at that time Mike and Travis were working out in the woods and I only saw them on weekends.
Right.
When they'd come in. They were both living in town, but they'd come in late at night and I'd go to work early in the morning, and I had my own family. So we didn't do a lot at that time.
So when you first got to see Travis, you know, many days after the event when he returned back with us, how did you take his story? I mean, what went through your head when he was telling you what he told you? What did he tell you as well?
Well, in the very beginning, Travis was very, very much a recluse. He pulled in. He didn't want to talk about it, period. He didn't want to associate with friends, family, or anybody. He just wanted to be left alone. And we just basically left him alone and let him do what he felt comfortable in doing. But when we did have family get-togethers and stuff, every once in a while Travis would just disappear. And they'd go looking for him and they'd find him under the kitchen table, just wrapped up in a fetal position. It was a terrifying experience, and public, even friends and family, was not comfortable to him.
Because there must have been media from all over the world sort of hanging around the area.
Yes.
Yeah.
Snowflake was a little town, and they kind of wanted to do their own thing. And all of a sudden, they were in the spotlight of the whole world. They had TV vans out from Japan and Germany, everywhere in the world had a van from a TV station trying to get pictures and interviews and interviewing neighbors and anybody they could. It was a real zoo there for several weeks or months.
Well, it must have changed the town as well. I mean, it must have, because it was obviously a very religious kind of town as well.
Yes. And his story didn't go over well. And like I said, his brothers were hellions.
Yeah.
And when Travis came up with the UFO story, that was the straw that broke the camel's back. That divided the whole town right there. Wow. They just could not accept that.
How did you accept it? How do you accept it now?
I've had an open mind and just I listen to what people have to say and make up my mind of whether to believe them or not. And I haven't found anything to disbelieve what they've said. Can I absolutely positively say that I'm 100% positive they had? Nobody can make that.
No. But then he's got a lot of proof to back up his claims. He's got all the
Oh, yes.
all his crew that were there at the time that witnessed this event, and that's what separates him from a lot of the rest. It's credible, sort of first-hand witness testimony.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, and of course it was in the press everywhere at the time. Yeah.
Well, the whole world has been watching since day one, and they've passed multiple polygraph tests. There's many stories of that when they made the movie, they went in and took a polygraph test right before the movie was made, and the producer just blew sky high when he found out.
Wow.
That could have blown his movie out of the water if they'd have failed.
Because the producer used to work for Gene Roddenberry.
Yes.
Yeah. Was it the Next Generation or the original series, the movies?
I can't point to anything.
Yeah. He was working for him though.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then he got sacked from Roddenberry when he found out that he was doing a UFO
Yes.
movie. Yeah.
Gene Roddenberry blew up, and you can't do that. It'll ruin your reputation. It'll ruin you forever. And he made it and came out fine.
It was very successful. I mean, being in the UK and having Netflix, it's on the Netflix version over there.
Right.
I'm sure it's been on the American Netflix as well. It was a popular. I remember watching it back in the day.
Right.
As as a popular movie. Quite ironic that Gene would say that about UFOs when his subject was all about the exploration of space and other civilizations.
Well, it was for Gene Roddenberry. It was all fantasy, and the reason that they picked Travis's story is it did not fit the mold of anything. It was an abduction, but it was an accidental abduction. And nobody was looking for fame or glory or anything. It was all accidental.
Well, I just want to say thank you for just giving some credence to Travis's story and everything. It's great to have met someone that knew him as well, or knows him.
Yes.
Thank you. So Travis Walton, thank you so much for joining me.
Well, nice to be with you.
I wanted to get you on for so long, do you know that? I've tracked you down at Contact before, and I'm so glad that we've got this opportunity right now to do this.
Well, I've done hundreds of interviews, but there's never time to get it all. There's always some things that aren't covered. Absolutely
there is. Well, like I say, I appreciate you giving us this time right now. I want to say that obviously there's so much, as you say, there's so many interviews out there that you've done. So I want to probably push this to a different direction, talk about more of the spiritual experience that you had in the, I want to use the word abduction there, but I'm going to stop myself there. And what would you call your experience?
Well, I'll just end it right there. Experience. I went with the name abduction for a number of years. I accepted that kind of terminology, but then gradually came to call it as being more of an ambulance call than an abduction, because it wasn't exactly voluntary, but probably pretty much of an emergency, a necessary thing that happened.
Absolutely, and that emergency was what? Just very briefly explain what happened.
Well, the blast of energy from the craft, rather than being a weapon deliberately aimed at me in order to capture me or in some way misinterpret my approach as an attack, I came to think was probably more of an accident. That area of the country has the second highest frequency of lightning strikes of any place in the United States. So I was thinking that it was a very likely explanation. Something to puzzle over for many years is what caused this was that perhaps the craft itself created a magnetic field that triggered a lightning blast, and I was the secondary discharge for that energy in its path to ground.
So let's get this right. We're in Snowflake, Arizona right now.
Yes.
This is your hometown now. Now, the event took place where?
About 35 miles west of here, up in the woods, where we had a Forest Service contract.
And how many people witnessed this event?
There were 7 of us all together. Unlike the movie, there was only 5 in the movie, but there was actually 7. So that was one change that couldn't be considered an embellishment.
So when we talk about Fire in the Sky was obviously the major motion picture that covered the story of what you went through before the event and after the event as well. And we'll put a link in the description. Most people have seen Fire in the Sky, but for those who haven't, we'll link it down below as well. It's a fantastic movie. And we'll get into Fire in the Sky just very, very briefly as well. So you were loggers. You saw a light, you saw a craft, you all witnessed a craft, and why did you go over to the craft?
Well, the term fire in the sky actually came from an incident that occurred with us on the way to work. Because of the frequency of lightning strikes, there had been a strike on a tree the night before. It was on fire up high. And so that was one of the possibilities we pondered in wondering what that glow coming through the trees was. Could it be a fire up there? So that's where Fire in the Sky came from.
Got you. So what happened? So you all saw this object, or you saw this craft to begin with, this disc-shaped craft. What shape was it? I mean,
it was a disc-shaped metallic craft. Very, it wasn't blazingly bright. It was just extremely shiny and giving off a very soft, sort of ethereal glow that just filled the area.
Now, you had no interest in that subject of ufology back in the day before this event?
Well, it's not. People act like if I had ever thought of it or heard of it at all, that must mean I was what do they call them? A UFO buff. That it had to be the result of some psychological obsession with the subject, which was not the case.
So you were struck by a field or something when you got near the craft?
Yeah, a blast of energy came out of the craft, threw me back through the air 15 or 20 feet. The crew thought it had killed me.
Your crew?
Yeah, the work crew. In their interviews with the sheriff, they each had their own individual interpretation. One described it as looking like a long blue flame. Another described it as looking like a foot-wide laser beam. And another compared it to a bolt of lightning. But whatever it was so powerful that they immediately were certain it had killed me.
You disappeared for how many days?
I was missing for 5 days and 6 hours.
Did the crew, your crew, see you enter the craft?
No, they did not. They fled at the moment I was apparently killed, and once they regained their composure, came back to see if they could help, and my body was gone.
So how many days before you returned back home then?
I was missing for 5 days and 6 hours, during which the crew was accused of murdering me and making up a bizarre cover story.
What's been some of the accusations of what you did in those 5 days, if it wasn't a UFO abduction?
Well, there was a whole variety of things, that it was perhaps earthquake light, some seismic activity generated a bolt of lightning from the ground that caused me to hallucinate the experience and walk around in a disoriented state and just none of these kinds of theories, that was Dr. Persinger's theory, none of these theories in an effort to explain it away matched up with physical evidence and other facts of the case.
So when you came back, you phoned your family to begin with from a payphone box? Is that what happened?
Yes, I telephoned my family and they came and got me. And because of the panic in the area, the hysteria, it was just, my brother, knew it was unsafe to remain in town.
You had drug tests when you came back as well. You were negative for any substance abuse?
That's true, but that doesn't keep them from pursuing the hallucination angle of the whole thing, whether it be by drugs or an electrical shock to the brain, whatever reason they would think it would be a hallucination, it just doesn't make sense that 7 people would experience an identical hallucination in all details.
What was the first thing, did you remember the whole experience when you were making that phone call back to your family? Did you remember how you got to the phone box?
I remembered most of everything that I was ever able to recall.
What were some of the most amazing things that happened to you on that craft?
Well, I was on board. I was terrified. I experienced a feeling of severe trauma, mortal injury. I felt like I was dying. I felt like I was suffocating. Maximum panic. At the same time, I'm registering that I'm with these beings and no apparent way out.
What did the beings say to you?
They didn't say anything. I was saying all kinds of things, screaming hysterically, but there was no communication. Although later I came to suspect that there was an attempt at some sort of telepathic communication. It was probably in conjunction with the stare that the 3 of them were staring at me, that gave me this squirmy, a very uncomfortable feeling in my head, very unpleasant. But later tests, brainwave scans, looking for brain trauma. This was at a world-famous brain trauma center. It was the hospital, Barrows Neurological, where Muhammad Ali went for when he started developing symptoms. And the technician was not informed of who I was. The hysteria and panic would have biased his report. So it was a good thing that he was just looking for signs of brain injury, and he found it. So the type of pattern that was recorded on those charts did not persist in 2 other subsequent brainwave scans.
When you look back at it now, when you remember that time in the craft, do you still remember it as is it the memory still there?
Yeah, the memory's still there. It's really hard to shake the crazy level of fear that I was experiencing, because it was so visceral. It was just so basic. I think the feeling of suffocation is probably one of the main triggers to maximum hysteria. But
for 5 days on that craft-ish, right? You're just laying there for 5 days?
I concluded that I was probably dead or clinically dead or unconscious most of that time. Later on, when I started to have little nightmares that didn't include one type of being, included the second type.
What do they look like?
They looked like us. I think that they were created or summoned, whatever, brought in because I was so combative because of my fear of these creatures that did not look human. But I'm thinking that perhaps it was just the only way that they were going to be successful in getting me back under anesthesia so that medical repairs could be completed.
So you don't think that that was their original form?
There was all kinds of theories involving these human-looking beings. Are there aliens species that are very similar to us? Were they technologically capable of whipping up some sort of an android that I would trust on such short notice? Or were they capable of generating an illusion in some way? I kind of doubt that explanation, because the whole reason they needed something with a human appearance is because mind control was not working on me, because of the neurological scrambling that happened as a result of being hit by this blast of energy.
Did you feel love from them?
I was too terrified to feel love from them. In hindsight, the fact that I was repaired, returned to safety, all in one piece, to me, it does reflect a level of concern that isn't consistent with the idea of them just, taking humans on board to see what pain does to humans or to do.
Right.
People very often begin with, describing my experience as being a victim of medical experiments. Well, I really don't think that's the case anymore.
What does it do when people don't believe you, and when you've gone through such a transformational experience, bigger than most people in a sense, right? To have that experience. Well, let me ask two questions. What about when people don't believe you, and what did the experience do for you, do you think?
Well, constantly, being subjected, it didn't begin with me. I mean, my crewmates were disbelieved and accused of murder and of being crazy and, schemers or, somehow concocting. And motives, there was never any limit to the number of motives, that it was all a scheme to get out of the logging contract or whatever. None of these things ever panned out. The actual contracting officers, finally had to be asked to sign a detailed affidavit that this event in no way could have benefited the crew, and there was never even any attempt to do so. It was never even brought up in discussion with the Forest Service.
And when you look at the experience now, what do you see the experience as, in a sense?
Well, it was certainly an extremely transformational experience. It wasn't forcing me to where I came, but I found my way to that place. To people ask me about, how did I interpret this in a religious sense? And I've always replied that, I don't consider myself to be such a religious person so much as a spiritual person, and I look for that sort of a understanding of it in hindsight.
Were you religious before the experience?
Not especially. I'd say probably less so than a number of members of my family. My younger brother had gone on a mission for the church. My older brother taught Sunday school. My sister was a Relief Society president. But by the time I came to this sort of thing, I was on my own, really, and searching for my own answers. And it was difficult because I had a much wider, much bigger universe to fit into my understanding of it all.
And what did it do to your family at the time?
Well, my family never stopped loving, never doubted me, and they stood by me the whole way. I'm sure it was very disorienting for them, but all of my family really stood by me.
Do you think it tested their faith?
I don't know that it did, but I do think that their faith had to be probably expanded a bit, because sometimes religious explanations just aren't as all-encompassing as they perhaps ought to be. I've given talks where people have, been alarmed by the very idea that there could be life beyond the earth, that this has to be satanic or delusional, or in some other way. They search desperately for a way to explain it away. And I try to share with people the kind of understanding that I've come to, even though it conflicts with my basic desire to stick with facts, and that I can point them to sources of information, verifiable things, facts and logic. It all comes down to facts and logic. When I get into my spiritual understandings, that's very personal. I don't have any documentation for my spiritual interpretations. All I can say is it's what I think, it's where I've come to.
What is that place you've come to?
Well, I think a kind of a understanding that creation is a lot bigger than so many people hold in their traditional religious views. Creation is vast. One of my responses to people stand up in the audience, well, don't you think that the existence of extraterrestrial life disproves the existence of God? And I say, no. What is there about all-powerful and all-knowing that you don't understand? What is there, what's your definition of infinite? Is it no bigger than the earth? So I've tried to explain things, find a way that I could bring people to the level of perspective that I've gained.
Well, obviously these beings, they could have been not just hundreds of years ahead of us, they could have been thousands of years ahead of us in technology, right?
Yes.
Does a technology advanced race equal spiritual advancement as well? Do you think they go hand in hand?
After decades of pondering these issues, I really do believe that the whole idea of, well, some aliens are good and some of them are evil. I don't think evil can survive hundreds of thousands of years, because evil is stupid. And obviously there's got to be a spiritual development that can be somewhat in step with the technological development over time.
Yeah, I mean, this whole thing for myself, of negative ET forces, I find it difficult that we live in a universe that's not loving and caring, but, hands up if I'm wrong, do you know what I mean?
Well, some people say, well, that's just wishful thinking. Well, the fact of the matter is, it's not just wishful thinking, I think it's logical. If you became vastly, a million times more powerful than the worst military dictator on this planet, you're either going to become good or you're going to destroy yourselves. Just the fact that they still exist to me is sort of prima facie evidence that they're not evil, or they would have killed each other off.
Someone watching or listening to this right now, and I'm saying I'm sat in front of someone that's had this experience. How does your story help someone, to better themselves or to change their life that may not be interested in the UFO subject, but to have contact with something beyond this world? What does that message do for those watching or listening to this?
Well, part of my spiritual training as a youngster, and that I've had all my life, that I still hang on to, is the concept of eternal progression, and the idea that as time goes on, it's got to be ever onward and upward, that it's got to be it's got to be progress, and definitely how we treat each other, and to be at peace with many of the things that people feel so angry about, has got to be a part of the essence of progress of life. It's just, I think it's true destiny is to end the militaristic, kinds of negative behavior you're seeing from humans on the planet today, and as it's been through all of recorded history.
Yeah, that's a beautiful message, and thank you for that. Obviously, some people in this community, and I use those words, well, I'm using those words right now, this UFO community right now, and then the sort of truth movement as well. They sort of use the UFO experience or the subject as, not to take responsibility for themselves, in a sense, like, they're going to save me. That's why I'm interested in, discovering this. That they've got technology that can help us. But really, unless we grow spiritually and help ourselves, they're never going to show up, are they?
I believe that's true. I think that it would be unethical for them to just hand us anything, here's a brand new box of matches, now go play. They're not going to give us technology, and we're really not deserving of that kind of assistance. What we really need is to find our way in terms of moral and ethical development, and I think it's something that most people are aware of existing. They're just not making it their mission in life to fulfill.
Absolutely. What do you think of the current state of, the subject of ufology with some of the other researchers and whistleblowers that are out there now? Because obviously you've been in this field for a long time as well.
Well, some of the promotion of so-called ufology has to do with a sort of a shock and awe, razzle-dazzle sorts of stuff, and that's why evil aliens and spooky stuff gets a lot more emphasis, because I guess it sells tickets, but I don't think it's correct at all. I think that it's kind of a negative propaganda that is really harmful and not too logical either.
Well, that's what I was going to ask you that as well. What does misinformation do? When people make up purposeful misinformation just for whatever reason they're doing it for, whatever ego reason there is behind it, that's not really helping people's awakening.
Well, when I've given talks and I say, well, so let's stop thinking of these beings as invading monsters. Let's think of them as those people from way over there that we don't know too much about. A lot of the audience seems a little disappointed, unfortunately, but I think some people are drawn to ufology because it is, haunted, vampires and ghosts and other scary things. It's another boogeyman for them, and I think that's not the way to go.
It's not the way to go. It's not, because where's the spiritual evolution in that? I mean, I used to think, right, that the spiritual side and the UFO side, they do not mix, but they absolutely do mix. They do mix.
Yeah. No.
And it's when the conspiracy side gets in there.
Well, all this stuff is just my opinion, and somebody can come along and say, no, sir, there absolutely is the evil kind, and they're in some kind of cosmic battle with the good ones, whatever. I just haven't personally seen anything to support that view.
No, absolutely not. And what would you want your sort of legacy to be in this field as well?
Well, that was one thing, that I was tempted on a couple of times, and I actually went that way. It was to just withdraw from it, just throw up my hands and not speak about it anymore. But I found out that there was no escaping it. I was stuck with it. So I may as well try to make something good come of it.
Yes.
If I can do something to promote understanding or knowledge, however incremental, to guide people in that direction, I'll do my part.
Without creating the cult following, right?
without
giving people their power back.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel that some of the bigger name people in this field should be, it would be nice to work with them? Or I suppose you're on totally separate paths, aren't you?
Well, some of the big names are people that I totally disagree with, and I'm not going to single anybody out,
No.
but there's other big names that I think are really making a major positive contribution. And, I've never even, dipped into trying to, say which cases are good cases, which ones are bad cases. I don't feel that it would be morally justified to pass judgment on anyone else's case without having fully investigated it, like what happened to me. People who didn't know anything were suddenly experts and were dismissing the whole thing.
Absolutely. There were people coming out of the woodwork for you many years later saying, oh, I knew Travis, or, I went to this party with him, or whatever. Do you know what I mean? There were people that said they knew you, and you never knew them. You never worked with some of these people that said they worked with you.
Yeah, I had a saying, right after it happened, it used to be, I would go out and the people that I knew well would look the other way and pretend they didn't know me. Now, it's improved. I go out in the community and people I barely know pretend we're old friends, and get a picture together. So I think that's progress. It's taken a lot of years to undo some of the myths about it.
Yeah, and I could just hear it in the back of my head, like, how do we know Travis is telling us the truth? How do we know he's telling you? Kevin, how do you know he's telling you the truth? And I don't know. I just feel you are to me, but I can't just go on that. Do you know what I mean?
No, we can't go on intuitions, and it has to come down to facts and reasoning. Are your facts true and verifiable, and is your reasoning valid? And it all comes down to that, and wishful thinking isn't going to get you there.
No, thank you for saying that as well. Well, what would you want a final message? What's a sort of important message you'd like to give to the audience?
Well, you know, for those who have some experience in a study of it, they probably have their own opinions. But people who are examining this topic seriously for the first time, I would hope that they would take a look at the facts first. Identify what can I verify here? You know, people very offhandedly say, "Oh, it's blah 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 blah." Well, you know, the question I ask is, how do you know this?
Right, right. Where would you like to see this subject go? How would you like to see it? I mean, obviously there's got to be future generations that are going to move this subject forward, but where would you like to see it go?
Well, I think there has been progress, serious. I think initially the government's efforts to sort of poo-poo it and tamp it down and deny the existence, it did not, it wasn't very enlightening, and also at the same time it was sort of damaging the government's credibility. Too many people knew that there is something real here. So the military response more lately is to share a little bit of what they've discovered, and the creation of a official protocol, a path for military personnel who have a sighting or an experience of some kind, a way for them to report it and record it without suffering career suicide or whatever. I think it's a major step forward.
Well, Travis, Walton, just thank you so much for joining me. It's been a pleasure to be sat with someone that's had the experience that you've had. It's amazing. Thank you.
Well, thanks for listening.